By the end of the video, I would like for you to know why the British decide to shift the war to the southern colonies, and I would like for you to be able to explain how General Cornwallis gets trapped on the coast of Virginia. The vocab you should know: General Cornwallis, Nathanael Greene, the Battle of Guilford County Courthouse, and Yorktown. So, as you already know from the reading you did yesterday, the war in the north ends more or less in a stalemate. The British capture key cities like Boston and New York and Philadelphia, but the American army continues to fight, and they continue to inflict losses upon the British army. So even though the British capture the cities, they do not win the war. Eventually, the Americans score a very important victory in the Battle of Saratoga, and this huge victory brings the French into the war. The French troops begin to arrive in the north. The first contingent of troops is 6,000 French troops under the French general Rochambeau. And basically, the Americans are getting stronger, and the British realize that they are not going to be able to win the war in the north. For this reason, they decide to shift the war to the south. So because they can't win the war in the north, they try to conquer the southern colonies. And one reason they decide to move to the south is there is a much larger amount of loyalist support in the south. The people in the south are much less on board with the whole independence thing than the northerners are. Also, there are fewer American soldiers, fewer Patriot soldiers in the south. So they think that it might be easier to conquer and control these territories because there are fewer enemies and more friendly, loyalist Americans. So the British send General Cornwallis, who is pictured there and who looks very, very fearsome with his pot belly and powdered wig. And he begins his campaign by capturing the important port city of Charleston in 1780. And this is a huge loss for the colonists. Basically, their last big city is captured by the British. So he goes on to gain control of Georgia and South Carolina. And because there are so many loyalists there, he's able to control the territory in a way that the British were not able to control areas like Pennsylvania and Massachusetts. After he conquers South Carolina and Georgia, he marches north to the North Carolina border. So the first thing that happens that helps the Americans is Nathanael Greene, who is an extremely competent general, is given command of America's southern forces by George Washington. And he goes south somewhere near Charlotte, North Carolina, and sets up command. And the first battle between, the first major battle between the Revolutionary forces and the British forces is the Battle of Cowpens in 1781. And this battle is pretty interesting. Basically, a bunch of American militiamen armed with rifles are able to do a lot of damage to the British army and then run away. Because of their rifles, they can shoot at the British way before they are in range to fire with their muskets, because rifles are more accurate. So they shoot at the British a couple times and then run away. So they lose the battle, quote unquote, but they inflict a whole bunch of damage on the British army. But nevertheless, the British continue north into North Carolina, and there one of the major battles of the South is fought, and it's the Battle of Guilford County Courthouse. And this takes place where modern-day Greensboro, North Carolina is, Greensboro being named after Nathanael Greene. And this is a huge turning point. So in this battle, the Patriot soldiers are able to kill or wound over 1/4 of the British army. And this happens in an interesting way, which we'll talk about in more detail in class tomorrow. But it's basically because Nathanael Greene is able to use American militiamen in a very effective way. He uses them in a way that plays to their strengths. And so by using the American militiamen effectively, Nathanael Greene is able to damage the British army so much that the British are forced to retreat to the coast of North Carolina. So they go to the port city of Wilmington, where they are resupplied by the British Navy. So from Wilmington, Cornwallis decides to march north to Virginia. And he decides to march north to Virginia in order to meet up with another British army that is up there. And he hopes that by combining with this British army, they'll be strong enough to continue the conquest of these southern colonies. But what Cornwallis does not expect is that George Washington decides to march south from Pennsylvania. And he is able to cut Cornwallis off in his march to the north. So Cornwallis is actually stuck between the Nathanael Greene's forces, who are marching from the south, and George Washington's forces marching from the north. So he decides to retreat back to the coast. While he's retreating to the coast, he actually gets trapped there on a peninsula. And this is because the American army, Washington's army, and Greene's army have combined to cut off any land exits. And the French Navy has surrounded the peninsula, and there's nowhere for Cornwallis to go. So he holes up in Yorktown and is eventually forced to surrender. So Cornwallis gives up. The Americans capture the entire southern British army, and this is a major defeat for the Brits. And this brings about the end of the Revolutionary War. Even though the war doesn't end right away, with the capture of Cornwallis's army in the south, the British are basically out of options and realize that they're going to have to forfeit the war. So that's the story. That's how the Americans win the American Revolution. So hopefully now you understand why the British decided to fight the war in the south, and you understand why Cornwallis got trapped on the coast of Virginia. It has to do with the French and the combination of General Washington and General Greene's forces on the Virginia mainland. That is all. I hope that all made sense to you. See you later.